our session here. And what we're doing today, today is our coffee with Katie, but I'm drinking water today. It's too hot for coffee. So hopefully you have a drink. And these are just free sessions that I host once a month with fellow cooperators around the country as a way to kind of give back in Principle 6 fashion, which is co-ops helping co-ops. When I was doing the kind of work that you're doing, I learned so much from my peers, and that found that principle to be one of my very favorite cooperative principles. So today I am here with Jess Spuddimer, who is my business partner with CoApp. So I have a consulting part of my business and coaching part of my business, which I help co-ops. Many of you who are on this call are clients of mine, which I appreciate. And then we have the CoApp side of business, which is the contact relationship management tool designed specifically for co-op capital campaigns at this point. And what we're doing today is diving into the very first ever CoApp Insight Report, which is pretty awesome. I put a link to the document in the chat, so if you don't have it yet, you can get it. And I strongly encourage you to get a copy and download it and share it with your co-op. Share it with your board members, your committee members, and use it. It's very valuable. It's the report that I wish I had had when I was growing owners and doing the important work that you guys are doing. And it really makes me happy to be able to share it with you and to talk with you about what we found. And so, oh, Jess, look at your background. That's cool. That's very professional. But anyways, what I want to do is kind of give you a little bit of information about the report and how it came to be, and then we'll talk through some areas of the report that I think are very helpful and would be very helpful to each of you. Susan, you're with Bay City as well, right?
Yeah, I am.
Okay, right. So we have Bay City with us today, earlier stage development, and then we have Free Range and Whitewater, later stage development in cooperatives. So we have folks who are getting ready to think about a capital campaign and prepare for their capital campaign, as well as a co-op who's growing ownership. And we've got information to share with all of you that will be helpful to you. So first of all, the report itself. So I was able to ask a few co-ops to share their data with us in terms of their capital campaigns. So these were co-ops that had capital campaigns in very recent past. And we did this, I was working with a class at Illinois State University who had offered to do some reporting for us. And that's how the ask initially went out to these co-ops. Was through this university project, we went to these co-ops and said, hey, would you share your data with us? And these kids are going to try to help us analyze it. That's where we started. We took that data then and brought it into CoApp when CoApp was ready. So we have data from 3 co-ops that were not using CoApp. So these co-ops were using spreadsheets and other means to keeping track of their ownership and their capital campaigns. And then we have 3 co-ops who have been using CoApp. So we have 2 ways of looking at the data, or 2 sets of data and ways that we can look at it. But really, the important thing I want to stress in terms of the creation of the report is, again, Principle 6, co-ops helping co-ops. The co-ops who gave us their information, and they gave us, and I'll clarify that, they gave us clean data. And what I mean by that is no identifiers. So we don't know names, we don't know, address, we don't know phone number, we don't know email, we don't know anything that identifies this data to a person. We just know the details of the data. So the number of contributors or the amount of the contribution, but we don't know who made it or anything like that. So we got their clean data. And I want to thank them and thank all of the co-ops who are using CoApp for using CoApp, because it is truly Principle 6 in action. It's us pooling our resources together to improve the cooperative movement as a whole. And when I think about data, and I was watching this morning, I turned on the Today Show while I was eating breakfast, and there was a funny, and that's not funny, but there was a segment on batting cages. And these kids who were using these high-tech batting cages, and they were accumulating or evaluating 50,000 points of data related to a child's baseball or softball swing. And they were using that data to improve the kids' performance. 100% of the children who use this tool improve their performance. And I was like, amazing. And the woman they interviewed said, if we're going to solve problems, we're going to have to use data. And I'm paraphrasing her here, but basically she was reinforcing what we're talking about today, that data can help us. And it's not the answer to all of our questions. And we have to use the human eye to evaluate it. But it really is so important. And so this report really, I think, is revolutionary. And I say that humbly. We feel very fortunate that the data that we've had shared with us has been shared with us, and that we can help others with it. So no other point in history have we had this kind of information. And I think it's important that as cooperators that we share that data and we use it to help each other. So that's a little bit of background on the report. And again, I want to thank the co-ops who have given us their data and who are using CoApp so that we can evaluate it. The most important piece of the Insight Report for you all, especially the folks from Whitewater and Free Range. And Jennifer, does she say what co-op she's from? Hillsborough, awesome. Hillsborough, you're on the verge of starting your capital campaign as well. So that's awesome. The page of the report that's most valuable to you is page 2. It looks like big spreadsheet, a big chart. And basically on page 2, we have done what probably takes a co-op months of time to do in terms of accumulating research. So when I'm working with a co-op, one of the first things that we do is research. What are other co-ops doing? What's been working? What was their capital campaign like? How much money did they raise? How long did it take them to raise it? What were their interest rates? All these questions we want to ask and get answers to, and then keep track of it all. Remembering who you talked to at that co-op and what they said, and was that the Whitewater co-op, or was that the Free Range co-op that told us that? It can be kind of overwhelming. So what we've done is summarize all of those questions for you in one chart. So across the top of the chart, FC 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, that's food co-op number 1, food co-op number 2, food co-op number 3. So we've taken out all the identifiers of the capital campaigns, but you can still use this information and allow it to influence your decisions as you're starting your capital campaigns. And then we give you the basics of that campaign, or the basics of that co-op: when they started, how many owners they had, when they started their capital campaign. That's important to note. We also give you a bit of a community profile, so you can see which of these co-ops reflects your community most closely in terms of demographics, size, median income, those kinds of things. And then we talk about the capital campaign specifically. So the year the campaign started, how many volunteers they had, how long it took. So the number of phases, that row of data is how long their campaign took. And the reason you'll see some different things there is because the first co-op listed there never stopped raising money for 9 months straight. They just kept working at it. They didn't have distinct phases of their co-op or of their capital campaign. The remaining co-ops did have distinct phases. And so you'll see the number of phases listed there. And then you can also see the types of contributions they had, what the interest rates were, what their targets are for different options within their campaign, what their campaign goal was, and if they were successful in raising those funds. And that's the complete row. And you'll notice that 3 of those 6 have completed their fundraising. So 3 of them are either open or in the process of opening, and the other 3 have not yet completed their fundraising. So they're still either in process or reevaluating what the process is in terms of how they'll raise their funds. And then that very last row tells you how the co-op was tracking their information, whether they were using some kind of spreadsheet or if they were using CoApp. So I'll stop right here because I've been talking for 12 minutes now, and just see if anyone has questions about that page or that part of the report.
Katie,
So
hi,
I have a question.
Okay.
So Whitewater, of the 6, it looks like FC3 would be our best comparison. Does that seem correct? Okay.
Agreed.
Maybe the others might want to pick where theirs are.
I had a similar question or comment. Ours is 2, Ron, 3, definitely. Could you give a little bit of definition around suburban, like what constitutes, I mean, I have an idea what constitutes rural and suburban, but I don't know if that's like the generally held definition.
Yeah, I'll chime in there. I did a lot of Googling and there's not a set definition for suburban. So we kind of thought about it as, you know, like smaller than your Chicago's and your New York's is really suburban, but I think FC1 could probably be considered suburban / urban. And when I Googled their location, I found both. So I think we'll probably eventually refine that a little further. But I think what you really want to be thinking about is the density of where your co-op and what you want to go. And so we went with just kind of a safer assumption of suburban if it wasn't one of those big cities.
Okay, thanks. And the other observation I have from this data that we've looked at so far is that where we are here in Itasca County, northern Minnesota, our poverty rate is about 46% of our kids up here are eligible for free and reduced lunch. So it's higher than I'm seeing here. Medium household income is lower than I'm seeing here. So we are slightly different. Ron, I don't know how that compares to where you are.
Very comparable, very comparable.
And I would say that your free reduced lunch poverty rate is going to be a lot higher than your overall poverty rate. So like I know that FC4 where they're showing 6% in poverty, there's free and reduced lunch is more like 28%.
Okay.
So there is quite a difference in that because people with kids have less resources in general, you know, and only about 20 or 30% of any population is going to have, it's going to be of families with kids in school.
The other thing, and then I'll be quiet, I'll just give you all of mine. I'm really encouraged to see that total raise on a couple of these was substantially more than they were going for. So that is a hopeful thing.
Yeah, Becky, you're right. Thanks for pointing that out. Many times, I see this happen that as a co-op gains momentum, especially towards the end, as you're getting really close to the goal, numbers really start to tick up fast, and often a co-op will raise more than they projected. Yeah, that's pretty cool. Gotta love that. Any other questions or thoughts about that? Well, I hope when you're planning your capital campaign, you use this to save yourself some months of time and research. Not everything, I should say, a lot of what you need to do in terms of preparation and research is compiled right here for you. So the next insight I want to talk about in terms of findings as it relates to your co-op is the next few pages of the report, which analyzes, or the next page, I should say, analyzes the 3 co-ops that were not using CoApp. So I want to preface what we talk about here by saying that each, and Jess can attest to this, we got 3 sets of data, 3 spreadsheets, basically from 3 different co-ops with 3 vastly different variations of the data. You know, some people gave us mountains of information, columns and columns and rows and rows and rows. Some people gave us 3 columns and 100 rows or 200 rows. You know, so really what we were doing was trying to compare apples to oranges to grapes and then compare those apples and oranges and grapes to CoApp. And so it's important to note that when we're using CoApp, we can structure the data in a way that we can very easily analyze. So it's another great way to help get good data is to use a standardized system, which CoApp is. But what we found with these 6 capital campaigns, and I say this with a caveat, keeping in mind that 3 of the 6 have not yet completed their capital campaign. The average contribution is just over $3,000. Now I'll flip that to say that when a campaign is successful, we see that average much higher. So if we pulled out the 3 co-ops who have finished their campaigns, we'd see an average probably more like $5,000–6,000 as an average contribution. So I want to keep that in mind, that this average is low with the knowledge that these 3 co-ops will finish their capital campaigns hopefully at some point in the near future, and we'll see that average go up. But on that topic, when you're looking at the 3rd page of the Insight Report, you can see the breakdown specifically of each co-op and how their contributions played out in terms of shares, gifts, and loans. And those are the 3 main types of contributions that we're seeing in the capital campaign: preferred shares, loans, and donations. So the next insight I want to point out is related to the year when someone becomes an owner and how that translates to their likelihood to participate in the capital campaign. In my mind, just using anecdotally the cooperative capital campaigns that I've had the experience of or the privilege to work on, I would say that early adapters of the co-op are our biggest funders. That would have been my hypothesis. And to some degree, this report proves that to be true. But what we also found is that those early adopters, they are strong contributors, but so are late adopters. So the people who join in year 1 and the people who join immediately before your capital campaign are the people who are contributing the most dollar-wise and percentage-wise, which is really cool to think about. So in year 1, we're seeing 36% of owners who became an owner in year 1 are going to participate in your capital campaign, compared to, and at the end of that, so the early years, that was year 1, year 8 is what is typical for these capital campaigns. So they've been organizing for 8 years, and that year where they have their campaign, 34% of new owners are contributing to the capital campaign. Now, the new owners contribute at a lesser average. Their average is about $2,400 compared to those early adapters. They tend to be on the higher end, so the $5,000 average, which I think is a really neat revelation. And what that tells me is that maintaining relationships with early owners is really important. Keeping engaged, staying connected, communicating with them, having events that they're interested in. But it's also really important to foster those communications and those connections with all the owners from year 1 to year 8. And then really in year 8, leveraging those new owners and not neglecting to include them in the ask when we're fundraising. Questions or thoughts about that?
I'll just add, I've been through 2 phases of a capital campaign for my cooperative, and there is a tendency to be so busy that you can't keep up with the new people coming in. And early on, we had a consultant say, "No, those are the people that definitely want to give," and we had all kinds of excuses built in about. It's hard to keep up with them, and they just joined, so there's no way they're gonna, extend more. They're gonna think that they gave just because they became owners, and that proved to not be true. So kind of resist the urge to go with some of those things that would let you avoid going after those newest owners.
Yeah, and I think creating a system before your campaign starts to include new owners is really important, because if you think about the process, you're gonna do something. You're gonna have an event. You're gonna mail a packet. Something's gonna happen. So every owner at that point is gonna experience that, whatever that is for you. But all the new owners who come after that, they're not going to have that experience. They're not going to get that packet. They're not going to be at that event. So creating a system to give them that same experience is important, you know, and we can help you work through that if that's something that you want to talk about. But absolutely, Jess is right. It's easy to neglect that, but this proves that we should not, definitely should not.
Katie, I have a question for you and Jess. Were you surprised to see that the preferred method was the loan, or is that kind of typical?
Well, it is typical, I would say, just because that has been our default.
Okay.
So typically a capital campaign has consisted of loans and donations, only loans initially. Then we added donations, loans and donations, and now preferred shares are becoming more prevalent. So it's not necessarily surprising, but that's just because of the history.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Susan.
Are you suggesting, like, for early adopters, that any communication should be especially tailored to just them?
Good question. I will think about that. I don't necessarily think so, Susan, but what I do know is that your communication should be tailored to the audience. And so what I mean by that is owners should get a different message than people who aren't owners. And so owners, you could categorize them as early adopters. They are owners. They are, you know, at some point in the future, they will be the early adopters. You know, whether you joined at year 1 or year 8 and year 20, you were an early adopter. So I would say absolutely you need to strategize your communication to two audiences: people who are owners and people who are not yet owners.
And maybe something to consider. I don't know how it will work out because we didn't do it, but one thing we wanted to do, and we kind of ran out of runway in terms of time and resources, was that we had thought about segmenting our owners so that we were going to do like an exclusive event with just the first 100, 250 and invite them all and make them feel really special and talk about how they were so important getting us there before we kicked off our capital campaign. And then introduce that idea and start that as part of our quiet campaign. But we ended up kind of halting and then launching really fast. And so we couldn't time it right to do those resources. But I would love to see a co-op do it, because I do think if you can segment your owners in that way and make them feel really special about what they did to get you to where you are and how, you know, and celebrate them, then they're going to feel special and come and listen and be informed. We had planned at one point to do small segments. So like the first 100 to make them feel really special. And then like the first 250, because that was a milestone where we did our first market study. And so we were going to kind of take some of those different milestones and attribute that to an ever widening circle. And then that would give all those that were before them multiple opportunities to come and be recognized at a special event. But, you know, COVID, logistics, runway,
Yeah.
those are
Yeah.
Right.
And we have a tendency in the cooperative world to treat everyone equally. So you want to think about this. This is a decision for every co-op to make. You know that does someone's ownership date dictate, you know, whatever. And so just thinking that through as your co-op is important before you go down the path.
Yeah, and that was a concern of our outreach team. You know, my personal philosophy is that equal is not necessarily equitable, and doesn't really, just because and a lot of times when you cast a wide net, you get fewer fishes than if you target. So, but that is definitely a consideration that will be on people's minds as well. You don't want anyone to feel excluded.
Yeah. Yeah, and there are ways to do it. You know, you can have the event open to the entire ownership base and highlight the first 100 owners. You know, the first 100 owners get a, yellow sticker on their name tag or something silly like that. You know, you could do it in a way
their
that,
charter, like their charter
Yeah.
members or something.
Yeah. Okay, so let's look at another.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
Speaking of segmenting the pool of information, was there any segmentation between males and females?
We did not look at that, and we don't have that data. We don't ask
okay.
We don't ask that question on ownership applications typically, but
Okay.
that you raise a good point, Ron, that Jess and I are talking about other points of data that might help us, like race, ethnicity, age, gender. Yeah. And so and thinking about how that might play into this.
The only reason I asked that question is I attend virtually every tabling event at our farmers market. And it's interesting talking to a guy versus talking to a female, because the female tends to be the shopper. But I've also just learned that the guy often says, let's join. The female seems to be more reserved. You know, she might answer questions about where she shops. You know, typically Whitewater is unique. We have no grocery store. We have a Walmart that everybody hates it, but so we don't have a grocery store. So I often say, where do you shop? Well, it's the female who answers, but it's the guy who says, let's join. So now, does that equate to money? Yeah, I don't know that one.
Yeah, I mean, anecdotally, I will say that most of our owners are women. Anecdotally, and I know that because when I set up the templates for sending emails, I defaulted to referring to their other half as a he, and I only had changed it a handful of times. Mostly my default way that I was doing my template was the way that I needed it to be, in that our primary subscriber to our shares was a woman and their joint subscriber was going to be their husband. But you know, on all sides, I have to talk to my spouse before I can make this decision.
Yeah, it's typically a joint household decision. And so that's another thing to keep in mind, you know, when you're launching your capital campaign, especially for the folks who are on the verge of doing so, that the first conversation you have with someone about the capital campaign is probably not the decision-making conversation. They're going to think about it. They're going to think, okay, is this something I think is a good idea? And if it is, then I'm going to talk about it with my partner. And so you have to think about it in terms of multiple conversations. Yes, Susan.
This is a little off topic, but just on the subject of men and women, I just wonder if other co-ops have the experience where we're on Facebook and sometimes some of our owners, and I think it's just been men, have said, hey, what's going on? You know, it's been like 7 years. Where's the grocery store? And anyway.
And so they're not on Facebook. They're not following you on Facebook, Susan. Is that what you're saying?
No, they're making comments on our Facebook page, I guess, like what's going on? Like, what's your business plan? Why don't we have a store yet? I think that's come from a couple of men, but I haven't heard about any women doing that. So
interesting.
Anyway, yeah.
Very interesting. Yeah.
I'm not sure exactly what to do about that.
I would say we've had both genders do that. So I don't know if there's a prevalence of one or more than the other. It probably depends on, I think a lot of entrepreneurs or people who are higher ranking in a business have that perspective because they're in established businesses or they've started their own. And it's like, didn't take me that long. You know, it's a different, we're getting there together. We're not getting there faster.
When I'm signing for somebody up, I frequently say, you know, one of you has to be the owner, but let's put the email of the person who opens the emails, because men typically don't. It's always the women who are checking the emails.
Yeah, good. That's a good point, Lois. Yeah, you want to be communicating with the decision maker, or the actor, the person who's going to take action within the household.
Before we get too far, just to add on to the idea of adding demographics to our, either to our ownership form or to a follow-up interest survey. They're good for the co-op, not only so that you can make sure you're being inclusive of everyone, which I think is a really important thing, but also so that you can fill out grant applications. And also, you know, if you know where the diversity is in your ownership, then you can do a better job of reaching out to ask a representative sample to volunteer. And I think a lot of times a request to volunteer needs to be made personal before somebody will step up. So, and I think gender pronouns, asking people their preferred pronoun is probably a great way to gather gender without having to create a gender question.
Yeah, because that's kind of you know, it's a topic that is it's prevalent these days, and we want to make sure that we're sensitive about that. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. So next thing I want to point out to you, I am on page 6 now of the Insight Report, if you're following along. I want to define for you how we have defined some titles. So an active owner is someone who has paid their membership and you know, is on our rolls as an owner. They're fully funded and active. They have voting rights. A partial owner is someone who is on some kind of other system, a payment plan, a scholarship. Every co-op has a different way of defining what that looks like for them. So they're not yet fully paid. Your bylaws define whether or not they have voting privileges. And a future owner, according to our data, is anyone in our system who is not yet an owner of the co-op. So these are prospective owners. And what we have found in terms of capital campaigns is that the majority of dollars come from owners. So 91.5%, according to the data that we're looking at here, the dollars that came from owners. That's not to say that partial owners, so people on payment plans or scholarships, and or future owners don't participate. They do, but at a much smaller percentage. So these tend to be out of state owners, perhaps, who can't make a loan or participate in the capital campaign, and they still want to help the co-op, so they're making donations, or they tend to be supportive family members or community members who really want this to happen, but they're not going to necessarily shop at the co-op. They don't have a need to be a member, but they want to support the project.
And I think a lot of the dynamics anecdotally and for future owners is that they would be the spouse of an owner who would, in our situation, we were offering shares, but we were limited to 10 shares per individual in Illinois. We had the owner buy 8 and the spouse buy 10, or vice versa.
Okay. So the next thing I kind of want to talk about in terms of the report is expectations in terms of the capital campaign. So when you're about to embark a capital campaign, you might be wondering, you know, what's going to happen? How is this going to play out? Are we going to raise all of our money in the first week, or, you know, when does it come in? And if you're thinking about it, logically, you know, if you're trying to raise $1 million in a 10-week campaign, well, you got to raise $100,000 a week, really, is what it boils down to. So as an organizer, you might be wondering, like, how does that really happen? How does that look? What does that look like? And so what we're seeing in capital campaigns is that the very first week of the campaign, that's usually when you announce your silent phase, the contributions that you've been able to amass before the campaign officially launches. That generates excitement and spurs activity. So you see a big big number in the first week of the campaign. And then you kind of see a roller coaster through the rest of the campaign. You see peaks and valleys, with the last week of the campaign being another big week. And I tell this to every campaign I work on, and I think Jess can tell you from her experience, is that people respond to deadlines. When that deadline hits, they will react. They're holding, if they are interested and they want to participate, they know the date and they're waiting till the end. I mean, they have a life, they have jobs and kids and family obligations, and this isn't their priority till it has to be their priority. But you'll see that on page 7 there, kind of a chart of what the weeks look like of the capital campaign and how it breaks out. And I think it's kind of important to look at that when you're thinking about your capital campaign, because when you're in the midst of it, when you're in one of those valleys of the roller coaster, it can feel like the bottom's dropping out. Like, what's going on? Why isn't anyone contributing? Why aren't they calling us back? Did we do something wrong? But if you see this data, okay, this is normal. This is going to tick back up. We have to do the work we need to do to make that happen, but we're going to see a change, and dollars will continue to come in again.
I think it's very right that people need a deadline, and you can artificially create those throughout your campaign by doing match challenges or by having an event. And so you might want to think about how to do that. And I think the roller coaster look, where there's peaks and valleys, is not necessarily a bad thing, because it kind of gives some of your volunteers a breather. Your volunteers can't be at the top of the roller coaster the whole time. So it's not necessarily a bad thing, but you're going to want to structure the milestones of your campaign to force deadlines all along the way.
Yes, Susan.
Do you have to ask people who give money if they're willing to for it to go into a match fund? Is that how you do the match campaign?
Yeah, it typically happens behind the scenes, Susan. So if you're having a conversation with a prospective contributor, and they're talking about a big number, $50,000 number, and while you're having that conversation, you're going to ask them, we can leverage that $50,000 if you would allow us to use that for a match. And I've never had anyone say no. When we've asked them that, what they do say no to is using their name, and that's okay to have an anonymous donor do the match. Some people say yes to using their name, which is even better, because then the people who know that person are like, oh gosh, they're doing it, I'll do it too. But absolutely, that happens in the conversation when you're talking about the amount and the contribution. And then I have a whole set of guidelines and templates and graphics to use when you're going to do a match, because you can't just do this. It's a very concerted effort. It takes a lot of energy and time. Your whole campaign takes a lot of energy and time, but this is a kind of like a mini campaign within the campaign. So you have to be very prepared. You have to have your communication strategy outlined. Your timing has to be right. Your callers have to be trained. They have to understand what's happening. So it's involved, but effective. It's worth the investment.
And I would say too that you behind the scenes in your quiet phase, you can also orchestrate, like if you know that people might be at a certain donation point, like if you can identify 10 households that would give 10,000, and you can coordinate with all of them to give that 10,000 to do a 10,000 match. That's one way. It gets a little complicated if they all want their names out there, but you can just say 10 families have come together to do this 100,000 match. When we were in the campaign, we kind of had a floor of between 20 and 25,000, where if we got one of those, we said, hey, can we hold on to this until we get a couple more, and then you can do a match with 2 other families. So then it would be a 3-family $75,000 match. So that's how we built ones when we didn't get the big ones out of the gate.
Yeah. And in a perfect world, it's nice to do this pre-campaign, like if you're having a successful silent phase, let's say you have $300,000 on the table, you might launch with 200,000 and use that $100,000 for a match 2 weeks in, so to speak. And so you kind of have to strategize how you use those funds and leverage leverage
Which
them.
is another reason to, kind of target your first 100, 200 owners or your first year of owners, because you can explain that to them and say, hey, the most successful campaigns have these match challenges. If you can give 100,000, that's going to be fantastic. Or, let's combine forces. And if we can get 3 families to do 75, if we can get, and kind of lay it out and see where people will fall, that might be a strategy that would be effective.
Yeah, we could have a whole session on match challenges.
Yeah.
Maybe we should. Maybe that should be a topic.
Do you use graphics? Like, sometimes you see those thermometers where they
Yep.
have, like,
Mhm.
do that. Yeah.
Yeah, we did Rooted Carrot Co-op. They did a match challenge that related to the time change. It was about to be spring forward or fall back. I can't remember which one. And so the challenge ended at 2 a.m. when we sprang forward. And so we used the clock as the thermometer. So, the 25%, like 3 o'clock was 25% of the money. And, it was cute. It was, when you have a good graphic designer, you can be real creative.
We've been using a beet.
Yes. Lots of food related thermometers, carrots, beets.
Beets.
Yeah. Okay. So, in regards to what Jess was saying about these peaks and valleys and how they relate to volunteer activity, that kind of leads us right into the next point I want to make about the Insight Report is that co-ops are on average reaching out to owners. So these volunteers are reaching out to owners about 500 times a week. So and reaching out to owners takes 3 forms, usually a call, an email, or a text. So thinking about, if you have 1,000 owners and we're going to have to call them 4, 5, 6, 7 times. That's a lot of call. That's a lot of contacts. We're going to have to reach out to them a lot of times. And so thinking about that activity in terms of the volunteers' time is important. And I think to think about that and to know it when we're recruiting our callers and our volunteers, that this is activity. This is active. This isn't just like calling 10 people. This is real dialing and emailing. And another thing I want to point out here is that we're seeing a trend, I would say, moving away from, and we don't have data to support the trend necessarily. The trend is anecdotal in my mind, but we're seeing more response and more activity related to emails and texts. So in my first capital campaign, 2017, we did not email and we did not text out of the gate. We did not. We called. That's all we did was call. They might have gotten email. They got emails from the co-op, but we weren't emailing them until we had a conversation with them. As the campaign progressed, we were like, okay, we're not reaching these people. We got to try something else. So then we resorted to email. And then finally, we had people texting us. So we would call them and leave a message, and then they text us back. Well, so now we're having this conversation via text message. And that trend has continued with every capital campaign I've worked on since. Way more interest in email and text. A person can respond, a person can read the email and respond to their email at 10 o'clock at night in their jammies. They can't take your call. They don't want to text you then. And so really email, I find, is a really great way. We can say a lot of words because we got to talk. We have to say a lot in order to be able to communicate what we're talking about. Just a lot of words are used, and you can use more words in an email than you can in a text. Clearly you can have more words in a phone call, but I prefer email as a means for people to respond when they want to. They can read it at their leisure. They can go to the website. They can review the documents. And so we're really seeing a lot more activity and response in terms of emailing and texting. So as you're planning your campaign, don't be afraid to encourage your volunteers to use these techniques.
And I just anecdotally, I might offer a slightly different perspective. I think Katie and I have a little bit different of opinion on this, but so we've done 2 phases of campaigns, just anecdotally for our co-op. And in the second one, we had like a role of emailers that solely focused on emailing people that we just felt might be a little bit harder to reach. And they got an email every single week telling them what the thing was. And that wasn't productive in terms of getting pledges. So the phone calls are still king when it comes to somebody deciding on a pledge. Like that's still the most effective like conversion piece. And we probably are going to lean more heavily in our third phase on texting as the secondary mean. So we're not going to have emailers in our next role. They will send an email, but more as a follow-up and support to their calls.
Yeah, an email, and then I say that in an email as a follow-up, you know, so you've talked to them, you've had a conversation, you've sent them the data, the documents, whatever it is they need, and they're gonna read it at their leisure, probably respond at their leisure. Yeah.
Right.
Okay, so the last topic here, we got 10 minutes left, so this is good timing, that I want to talk about in terms of the data that we've evaluated in this report is how it relates to owner growth. And these numbers are strictly the co-ops who are using CoApp. So the 3 co-ops who are using CoApp, and we have all of their data in a standardized format. We can evaluate it. And when I would have anecdotally before we had this data as a co-op organizer, I would have said that summer is the most effective time to grow owners. So you grow the most owners in the summer. And we did find some support for that here, but we also found that there were other times, other months of the year where owner growth was prevalent. And according to the data, what we're seeing is that April is a big month for owner growth. April, June, October, and December, which December really surprised me. And because typically it feels like nothing's happening in December. People aren't, very active. And I think gift ownerships probably are a good portion of what's happening in that towards the end of the year. But I wanted to talk with you guys and ask you what your thoughts are on those months. Does that reflect what you see happening in your co-op? Lois, what do you think about what's happening in terms of owner growth for free range?
I think that August and September seem to be, and it's because we're able to be out and about in the community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's our big months up here.
Yeah. And I think that's what's spurring the April and June growth is that farmers markets are probably starting. We're tabling more. Summer's in full swing. You're eating all this great food. You're thinking, oh my gosh, I wish I had access to this all the time, and now I can have a co-op. So that makes sense to me. As does October. I think October would probably be the end of that fall season, Lois, where you're seeing growth. August, September, October timeframe. It'd be interesting to pull your data into CoApp and then analyze it and see how it compares. But Becky, are you familiar enough with owner growth? Yeah, I wasn't. You're just
No, I'm not.
recently. Yep. Yeah. Well, we can ask that at our next meeting. We'll talk about that.
I know that I did give 2 memberships as gifts for Christmas though.
Oh, so that makes sense to you. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Susan, how about you? What do you see in terms of owner growth?
We really haven't had too many new owners recently. I think we've tabled at some bazaars and gotten a few new owners, but I haven't really been involved for that long, so I can't say from much perspective.
Yeah, gotcha. Dave, have you been? Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Going back to the emailing. Do people use their own email addresses to email, or is it somehow through the co-op?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a that's a decision every co-op makes. And my, I would say until very recently, my personal opinion was, yes, it's your personal email because it's owner to owner. And it's not an email from the co-op, it's an email from me, Katie, as the co-op owner of our grocery store. Same with phone, using your phone, using your own cell phone, your own number. It doesn't come through as a co-op number. But some co-ops, food shed co-op, for example, in McHenry County, Illinois, they used a phone service that's called Grasshopper. And so all of the callers dialed into that service. So when they called out, it looked like the co-op was calling them, and they were wildly successful. So I it's anecdotal. We can't say if that, played into their success or not, but they did have success. Their campaign was successful. And they used, I think they allowed volunteers a food shed email address if they wanted it. They also encouraged volunteers to create a Google account just for this work, so you could say Katie, food shed Katie at gmail.com or something like, something that identified it as a co-op, but allowed all of that communication to be housed in one thing. So it's a decision each co-op has to make about how that plays out.
Thank you.
Okay, other questions, thoughts, or comments about the report?
I'm curious, I didn't see it in the report, but I'm curious to do a deeper dive into the silent portion of the campaign.
Okay.
And how the different co-ops approached that, the processes that they used, how they define success, things like that.
Yeah, great. That's a great topic, Becky. I think that's probably something we could put on the list. I wrote it down as a topic for a next coffee with Katie. And I think that could be an up and coming conference topic. I mean, there's a lot of depth there, absolutely, and a lot of expertise. The silent phase of your campaign is probably the most similar to a traditional fundraising campaign, where you're having one-on-one meetings and you're sitting down with people and you're talking through. So that's a great topic. Great idea.
Thanks.
Other thoughts, questions, ideas, feedback? Do you find the report helpful? Oh, Ron, you're on mute.
I think the report is awesome. I think you're commenting on the second page is spot on, because for those of us who are in the beginning stages, we have to answer all those questions before we can move forward. And all of it on one page is crazy good. Because otherwise we're just pulling it from this and that, and but it's a starting point for all of us that are diving into a capital campaign. And I think it's critical information for the success of our campaigns. Going in, if we know all this information ahead of time, just think how much farther ahead we are in week 1, 2, 3, and 4, and all the way through. It's
right.
I think it's huge.
Great. Glad to hear that, Ron. Yes, Susan.
There's that the FCI capital campaign workbook too, that some of us have been reading through it, and it just gives you an idea of everything that's involved. If that's free, I think, on their site if you want to.
Yes. Yes, I strongly recommend that, Susan. I'm so glad you mentioned it. It's invaluable, and was the foundation of my work for many years. Yes, and still is, I would say. Yes.
And Susan, you said that's on the FCI website?
Oh, yeah. I'll put a link in the chat.
Thank you,
Becky.
Katie.
And that it's in the list of things that you'll get. I think.
And I don't print many things out, but I printed it out. I highlight it. Going 2 phases. I've I refer back to it. It's a very useful tool.
Becky, I have a hard copy
Okay.
I can give you.
Actually,
Thank
I
you.
wish I have my hard copy. I wish if it was handy, I would show you all. I think, oh, I can't find it right now, but it's all tattered and coffee stained and highlighted. And
Like a cookbook, huh?
yes, yes.
So
A
you-
well-loved cookbook.
You could buy it. You could buy it from the FCI or not. I mean, no, you can't buy it. Okay. It's just
It's
a
free.
PDF.
It's free. Yeah.
I may have gotten it off Amazon to buy a printed copy. I don't remember.
Oh. Maybe a bound. Is it bound? And yeah, interesting. We have a couple minutes. If anyone has other questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Jennifer and Dave, you've been quiet. I know you're listening in, but feel free to post questions in the chat or chime in. And Dave, I saw your comment that you didn't see a link to the document. I did put another link in the chat, so hopefully you saw that and can download it. And if not, I can email you a link, Dave, if you'll put your email in the chat. Great. Glad to hear that, Dave. Okay, well, I guess if there's no other questions, this hour seems to fly by every time we do this. But it's really fun for me. I hope it's been valuable for you. And I hope you'll take this report, share it with your co-op. This report it's important for your capital campaign team and your board, but also your outreach team. You know, the things that we're talking about in terms of capital campaign preparation, you guys can be thinking about and when you're growing owners. In terms of Bay City, you know, how you're communicating, who you're engaging, how you're keeping people connected to the co-op so that we can ask them for funds later when we get to that point. So, all right. Well, thank you guys again for joining Coffee with Katie today, and I look forward to having you back again soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
Oh, I should take a screenshot. Darn it. Why didn't I think of that? I never remember. Oh, there goes my alarm. Jess, you're on mute. Did you say something?
You might want to stop recording.
Oh, yeah. Good idea.